The first week was the hardest. Thomas brought the foal to the old equipment shed behind his house and made a stall from old wooden boards and clean hay. He named her Courage, even though she did not look courageous. She looked scared and sick and too small to survive another day. The veterinarian from town came on the second day. His name was Dr. Harris, and he had kind eyes, but his words were hard. "She's too far gone," he said, looking at the little horse standing in the shed. "Her ribs are showing too much. Her lungs sound weak. She probably has some kind of infection. I can give you medicine, but honestly, Thomas, this animal should have been put down at the auction. Spending money on her, it's not wise." Thomas nodded and thanked the doctor. He paid for the medicine, which cost $10. Now he had $20 left. He did not ask for the doctor's advice again. That night, Thomas sat in the shed on a pile of hay, watching Courage stand alone in the corner. She did not eat much. She did not move much. She just stood there, breathing slowly, waiting for something Thomas did not understand. He mixed oats with warm water until it became soft like soup. He brought it to her in a bucket. Courage looked at it for a long time. Then she ate 3 small bites and stopped. It was not much, but it was something. Thomas stayed with her for hours, sitting quietly nearby, not forcing anything. His neighbors thought he was crazy. He could hear them talking when they came by during the day. "Poor Thomas," they said. "Grief has broken his mind. He spends more time in that shed than in his own house." But Thomas did not care what anyone said. By the second week, Courage was worse. Her breathing became loud and rough. Her eyes looked cloudy. She started to shake during the cold nights. Thomas brought blankets and laid them across her back. He mixed more medicine into her food. He stayed with her through the darkness, watching her, whispering to her, willing her to keep breathing. "You have to stay," he whispered in the darkness. "You have to stay with me. Please." The third week brought the fever. It came suddenly, like a thief in the night. Thomas woke in the shed because something was wrong. Courage was on the ground, lying in the hay, her whole body shaking with heat. Her skin was burning. Her eyes were half closed. Her breathing was fast and desperate. Thomas ran for water. He soaked cloths in the cold water from the well and laid them on her neck and her legs, trying to cool her down. He sat beside her, terrified that this was the moment when everything would end. This was the moment when the foal he had spent his last money on would die in a shed in the middle of nowhere. He did not sleep that night. He did not eat. He just sat there with his hands on her, feeling her fever, feeling her fear, and he made a promise to her without speaking. "I won't leave you," he said. "I won't let you go alone. Whatever happens, you won't face it by yourself." For 7 days, the fever stayed. Thomas's neighbors stopped coming by. The bank's letters kept arriving, but he did not open them. He did not think about the deadline. He did not think about losing the ranch or the house or anything else. There was only the shed and Courage and the endless cycle of getting water, mixing medicine, soaking cloths, and whispering words that maybe did not matter but had to be said anyway. On the 8th night, something changed. Thomas was sitting against the wooden wall, barely awake, when he noticed Courage's breathing. It was slower now, not the desperate, fast breathing of fever, but something calmer. He got up slowly and put his hand on her neck. Her skin was still warm, but the terrible burning heat was gone. The fever had broken. Courage's eyes opened a little, and for the first time in a week, there was something in them besides fear and pain. There was something like recognition, like she saw him, like she understood that he had stayed. Thomas knelt down beside her, and his shoulders shook with something between a laugh and a cry. He had not slept properly in 8 days. His clothes were dirty. His beard was long. His eyes were red. But Courage was alive. She was alive. The next days were slow and quiet. Courage could not stand yet. Her body was still weak, still broken. But she ate more. Her breathing became normal. Thomas brought her fresh hay and soft food and clean water. He sat with her through the quiet afternoons, and sometimes he talked to her, and sometimes he just sat there, both of them breathing together in the dusty light that came through the gaps in the shed walls. By the 4th week, Courage could stand. She was shaky on her legs like a newborn foal, but she stood. Thomas led her slowly around the shed, step by step, supporting her with his hand. Every step was hard. Every step took everything she had. But she kept walking because Thomas was there, and somehow that was enough. By the 6th week, she could walk out to the small pasture behind the shed. She was still thin. Her coat was still dull. She would never look strong in the way that horses in the auction look strong. But her eyes were different now. The emptiness was gone. Instead, there was life in them. There was trust. There was a reason to wake up in the morning. Thomas was different too. He did not look like a broken man anymore. He looked like a man who had a purpose. His hands were gentle when he touched Courage. His voice was soft when he spoke to her. His eyes had something in them that had not been there before. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Something like a reason to keep fighting, even when fighting seemed impossible. One afternoon in early autumn, Thomas sat on the fence and watched Courage eat grass in the pasture. Her movement was still weak, but she was eating. She was growing stronger every day. A man rode up on a horse. It was the horse trader from Denver who had come to the ranch once before, looking for young horses to buy. "I heard you had a young filly," the man said. "I'll give you $1,500 right now. Cash. No questions." Thomas looked at Courage eating grass, completely unaware that her life had just been valued at $1,500. "She's not for sale," Thomas said quietly. "2,000? The trader asked. "Not for sale," Thomas said again. The trader shook his head like Thomas was crazy, and he rode away. Thomas turned back to watch Courage, and he smiled. For the first time in 3 years, he smiled like a man who had something that money could not buy. The fever months had changed everything. Not just for Courage, but for Thomas too. She had survived because he would not let her die. And he had survived because she had given him a reason to keep living. By summer, Courage could walk across the entire pasture without stopping. Her body was still thin, but not dangerously thin anymore. Her coat had color in it now, a deep reddish brown that shone when the sun hit it. Her mane was thick and shiny. Her legs were still long and thin, but they were strong now. You could see the muscle in them. You could see that she was becoming a real horse, not just a dying animal that someone had forgotten. Thomas watched her every day. He would sit on the fence in the afternoon when the sun was warm, and he would watch her eat grass and run in small circles and enjoy being alive. These moments were his only peace now, because everything else was falling apart. The letters from the bank had stopped coming in April. Instead, a man in a suit came to the house in person. His name was Mr. Caldwell, and he carried papers and a pocket watch and a hard expression on his face. "You have until the end of September," Caldwell said, standing in Thomas's kitchen. "That gives you 3 months to arrange your affairs. After that, this property belongs to the bank. We will auction it off in October." 3 months. 90 days. After 30 years of owning the land, after building the house with his own hands, after burying his wife under the big oak tree in the front yard, Thomas had 90 days to leave. He had no money. He had no job. He had nowhere to go. He had nothing except a horse that once cost $20 and was now becoming valuable. In July, the horse trader came again. His name was Samuel Carr, and he was a smart man who knew horses and knew how to make money from them. He rode up to the ranch on a horse that was worth more than Thomas's entire property. He smiled like he was doing Thomas a favor. "Thomas," he said, shaking his hand, "I heard your situation. Bad drought. Bad luck. I'm sorry to hear it, but maybe I can help you." Thomas felt something cold in his stomach. He knew what was coming. "That filly of yours," Carr continued, looking toward the pasture where Courage was standing. "She's grown into something special. Good bones. Good bloodline. I'd imagine from the way she moves. I've got a client in Denver who breeds racing horses. He pays well for young fillies like that." Thomas did not say anything. "I'll give you $2,000, Carr said. "Cash. Today. Right now. That's enough to rent a small place in town, enough to buy food for a year, enough to give you time to figure out your life." $2,000. It was an enormous amount of money. It was more money than Thomas had seen in 5 years. With $2,000, he could survive. He could rent a small house. He could get a job as a ranch hand for someone else. He could have a future that was not on the street, not in poverty, not completely broken. All he had to do was sell Courage. "I need to think about it," Thomas said quietly. "You have 1 day," Carr said, and he rode away. That night, Thomas did not sleep. He sat on the porch of his house and watched the sun go down. The sky turned orange and red and purple, and the land he loved looked beautiful in that fading light. Tomorrow or the next day, someone else would own this view. Someone else would watch the sun go down from this porch. Someone else would sleep in his bed and eat in his kitchen and live in his house. He walked out to the pasture where Courage was sleeping under the stars. She was lying down in the soft grass, her legs tucked under her, her breathing deep and peaceful. Thomas sat down beside her, and she woke up and put her head on his leg like she always did. His grandfather's voice came back to him, an old voice from childhood, speaking words Thomas had not thought about in 50 years. A man is only as good as his loyalty, his grandfather had said. A man who abandons the ones who depend on him doesn't deserve anything better. He doesn't deserve success. He doesn't deserve happiness. He only deserves what he gets. Thomas sat there for hours, his hand on Courage's neck, feeling her heartbeat, feeling her trust. She had been abandoned once. At the auction, nobody wanted her. She was left alone in a pen, unwanted and forgotten. If not for Thomas, she would have died. She would have been put down or starved or sold to someone cruel. She would have disappeared into nothing. She survived because Thomas would not abandon her. And now she was healthy because Thomas loved her. And now he was thinking about selling her to save himself. Thomas put his forehead on her neck and felt something break inside his chest. He understood, in that moment, what kind of man he wanted to be. He understood what choice would make him able to look himself in the mirror. He understood what his grandfather meant. A man who sells a horse that saved his life is not a man worth saving. When the sun came up, Thomas was still sitting beside Courage. His clothes were wet with dew. His face was covered with dust. His eyes were red, but he had made his decision. Samuel Carr came back at noon. "I have your answer," Thomas said. Carr smiled, ready to hear about the sale. But Thomas shook his head. "Courage is not for sale," Thomas said. "Not for $2,000. Not for $10,000. Not for any amount of money in the world. She stays with me." Carr's smile disappeared. "You understand you're going to lose this ranch?" "I understand," Thomas said. "You understand you have nothing? No money, no job, no future?" "I understand that too," Thomas said. "Then you're a fool," Carr said, and he turned his horse around and rode away. That afternoon, Thomas started packing. He did not pack furniture or expensive things. He packed only what he could carry or what he could load onto a wagon. He packed clothes and tools and the letters his wife had written him before she died. He packed a picture of his grandfather. He packed a blanket that his grandmother had made by hand 50 years ago. And he made a plan for him and Courage. They would leave in 2 days. They would ride down the mountain and into the valley beyond. They would find work somewhere. Maybe someone would hire a man with no money but strong hands. Maybe someone would let him be a ranch hand or build fences or do hard work for small pay. Maybe he and Courage would survive. Or maybe they would not. But they would survive together or they would fall together. Either way, he would not be alone and Courage would not be abandoned. That night, Thomas stood in the doorway of his house for the last time. He looked at the rooms where he had lived his whole life. He looked at the kitchen where his wife had cooked meals. He looked at the bedroom where they had slept together. He looked at the porch where they had watched sunsets. Then he turned away and walked toward the shed where Courage was waiting. He had made his choice. He had chosen loyalty over survival. He had chosen a horse over security. He had chosen to be the kind of man his grandfather would be proud of. Whatever came next, it would be with Courage beside him. That was enough. The morning they left was gray and cold. Thomas loaded a small wagon with everything he owned that was worth carrying. His tools, his clothes, his photographs, his grandmother's blanket, his wife's letters. Everything else he left behind. The bank would come and take it, and new people would move into his house, and eventually nobody would remember that Thomas Morgan had ever lived there. He tied Courage to the back of the wagon, and they started down the mountain road. The road was long and dusty, and it stretched toward a future that Thomas could not see. He did not know where he was going. He did not have a plan beyond leaving. He had heard that there were ranches to the south. Maybe someone would need a worker. Maybe someone would let him and Courage stay. That was all the hope he had. By afternoon, the sky changed. Dark clouds rolled in from the north like an angry ocean. The wind started to blow hard, pushing the wagon, making Courage nervous. Thomas could smell the storm coming. He could feel it in the air. The kind of storm that kills things. The kind of storm that changes everything. "Come on, girl," he said to Courage. "We have to find shelter." But there was no shelter on this mountain road. Just rocks and dirt and dead trees. The storm came fast, faster than Thomas thought possible. One moment, there was gray sky, and the next moment the world was filled with rain and lightning and wind that felt like it could tear a man off his horse. Thunder crashed so loud that the wagon shook. Courage pulled back hard, scared and confused. Thomas held her tight, trying to calm her, trying to keep the wagon moving. That was when he heard the scream. It came from the side of the road, from somewhere up the mountain. A girl's voice, high and terrified. Then the sound of a horse neighing in panic. Then the sound of something heavy falling. Thomas stopped the wagon. Every part of him knew that he should keep going. He should find shelter and take care of Courage and think about himself. But his grandfather's voice came back again, stronger now. A man who hears another soul crying for help and does nothing is not a man at all. Thomas tied Courage to a rock and ran toward the sound. He found them in the rain and lightning, maybe 50 yards up the mountainside. A young girl, maybe 12 years old, was trying to stand up. Her horse was on the ground, screaming. One of the horse's legs was bent at a wrong angle. A break. A bad one. The girl saw Thomas, and her face filled with hope and terror at the same time. "Please," she cried. "My horse. Please help my horse." Thomas knelt down beside her. "Are you hurt?" "I can walk," she said. "But my horse." "I know," Thomas said. "I'll help you. Come on." He lifted the girl carefully. She was light in his arms, probably scared out of her mind. Rain poured down on them. Lightning lit up the world bright as day. And in those moments of brightness, Thomas could see the broken leg clearly. The horse would have to be put down. It was the kind of injury that could not be fixed. But not right now. Not in this storm. "We have to go," Thomas said. "I have a wagon down the road. We'll come back for your horse when the storm passes." "No," the girl cried. "No, we can't leave her." But Thomas was already moving. He carried the girl down the slope, through the rain, through the lightning. His feet slipped on the wet ground. His clothes were soaked. But he held her tight, and he did not fall. When they reached the wagon, Thomas wrapped the girl in his grandmother's blanket. He gave her some water to drink. Her teeth were chattering from cold and fear. "What's your name?" Thomas asked. "Emily," she said. "Emily Hackett. I'm Thomas. We're going to wait out this storm. Then we'll go back and take care of your horse." He sat with her under the wagon, both of them wrapped in blankets, while the storm raged above them. The thunder came so close that it felt like the sky was splitting open. The lightning was so bright it hurt to look at it. But Emily was not crying anymore. She was just sitting there, holding Thomas's arm, breathing. "You came back for me," she said quietly. "Of course I did," Thomas said. "You needed help. My father says most people don't help other people anymore. He says people only care about themselves." Thomas did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Your father might be right about most people, but not about all people." After 2 hours, the storm started to pass. The rain became lighter. The thunder moved away. The sky was still dark, but the immediate danger was gone. Thomas and Emily walked back up the mountain. The horse was still there, still breathing but suffering. Thomas looked at Emily and then looked at the horse. He knew what had to be done. Will you have to?" Emily could not finish the sentence. "Yes," Thomas said gently. "I'm sorry, Emily." He had a rifle in the wagon. He walked the horse away so Emily would not see, and he did what had to be done. It was kind. It was fast. It was the only mercy he could give. When he came back, Emily was crying, but she was not screaming. She was crying the way a person cries when they understand that sometimes terrible things have to happen. Thomas did not speak. He just held her hand. In the distance, they heard the sound of horses coming. Several riders, moving fast. A moment later, a man on a large black horse appeared through the clearing mist. He was older, maybe 60, with a hard face and alert eyes. He saw Emily, and his face changed from anger to relief to something else. "Emily," he called out, jumping from his horse. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Father," Emily said. "This man saved me. My horse fell and was hurt, and he got me to shelter, and then she cannot finish. The man, who was clearly Emily's father, looked at Thomas. He looked at the rain-soaked man in torn clothes, standing in the middle of the mountain pass. He looked at Courage tied to a rock in the distance. He looked at the wagon with everything Thomas owned. He looked at his daughter, holding Thomas's hand. "What's your name?" he asked. "Thomas Morgan," Thomas said. "I'm Richard Hackett," the man said. "This is my daughter Emily. You saved her life." "I just helped," Thomas said. "Anyone would have done the same." Hackett shook his head. "No, they wouldn't have. Most people are too busy thinking about themselves." He looked at Thomas more carefully. "You're not from around here. Are you running from something?" Thomas did not want to tell him, but something in Hackett's eyes was kind, and Thomas was tired of hiding. "I lost my ranch," Thomas said. "Bad luck. Bad drought. I sold my last horse to save a sick foal. I've got nothing now. I'm just trying to find work somewhere, trying to survive." Hackett looked at Courage. "That's the horse you saved? That young filly?" "Yes, sir," Thomas said. "She looks strong now. But I heard about a boy at the auction, spent his last money on a dying horse." "That was you?" Thomas nodded. Hackett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. "On a ranch. A big one. 300 horses. I need men who understand what it means to take care of something, to stay loyal to something even when it costs them everything." He paused. "You did that with your horse. You did that with my daughter. I'm hiring you. You and your horse and whatever you own. Come work for me." Thomas could not speak. He could not move. He could only look at this stranger who had just offered him everything. "Yes," he finally said. "Yes, sir. Thank you." Emily smiled and squeezed his hand. And in that moment, on a mountain road in a clearing storm, Thomas Morgan's life changed forever. 20 years had passed. The ranch called Hackett's was now the largest in Colorado. Its horses were known from California to Texas. Buyers came from New York and London, wanting to own animals from the bloodline that had become famous across the entire frontier. Thomas Morgan stood in a large barn made of fine wood and strong stone. He was 62 years old now, and his face was weathered like an old map. His hair was white. His hands were still strong, but they moved slower than they used to. Yet his eyes were clear and sharp, and when he looked at a horse, he saw things that nobody else could see. He was not just a ranch hand anymore. He was the head of all horse operations. Every decision about breeding and training and selling went through him. Young men came to learn from him. Rich owners came to ask his advice. Newspapers had written about him. They called him the horse whisperer of the West. But Thomas never thought of himself as a legend. He thought of himself as a man who had once spent $50 and made a choice. Courage was no longer with him. She had died 3 years ago at the age of 23, which was old for a horse. Thomas had buried her under a big oak tree on the ranch, the same kind of tree where he had buried his wife decades before. He would sit under that tree sometimes and remember the little foal in the auction barn, so sick and broken and forgotten. Courage had given Thomas 13 foals. Each one was special. Each one carried something of her strength and intelligence. Some had been sold for thousands of dollars. Some had won races. Some had been kept on the ranch and used to breed more champions. The Courage bloodline had become legendary. But that was not really the legend people talked about. Emily Hackett, now a woman of 32, was the one who told the story correctly. She would bring her children to sit with Thomas, and she would tell them the true legend, not about money or success, but about something much deeper. "My father hired Thomas because Thomas saved my life," Emily would say. But that was not the real reason. The real reason was because Thomas was the kind of man who would leave everything he owned to help a stranger. The real reason was because Thomas had already shown that he understood what loyalty meant. Thomas would sit quietly and listen to Emily tell the story. He would not interrupt. He would just listen and remember. The real legend had begun on the day Thomas Morgan stood in an auction barn with $50 in his pocket. A man stood in front of him one afternoon, a young man, maybe 25 years old, riding a beautiful horse. His name was James Dalton, and he wanted to buy a horse from the ranch. But he wanted something more than that. He wanted advice. "Mr. Morgan," the young man said, "everyone tells me I should build my business around money. Buy low, sell high. Don't get attached to the animals. Just think about profit. but I watch you with the horses and you do something different. You care about them. How do I balance that with success? Thomas set down the saddle he was cleaning and looked at the young man for a long moment. You don't balance it, Thomas said finally. You choose. You either care or you don't. You either understand that an animal depends on you or you don't. If you care, sometimes you'll make choices that cost you money. Sometimes you'll refuse to sell a horse because it doesn't deserve a bad home. Sometimes you'll spend money taking care of something sick when nobody would blame you for letting it die. The young man listened carefully. But here's what I learned, Thomas continued. When you make those choices, when you choose loyalty and care over profit, something happens. People notice. Animals respond. Success follows, but not because you chased it. Success follows because you became someone worth following. People want to work for someone like that. Animals become better because they're treated like they matter. Buyers want to buy from someone they trust. Everything grows from that one choice, to care more than a profit. The young man thanked him and rode away. A year later, he came back and told Thomas that his business had doubled because he had changed how he treated his horses. People wanted to buy from someone who cared. This happened again and again over the years. Men and women came to Thomas with questions about business and life. And Thomas always gave them the same answer. Choose loyalty. Choose what is right. Choose to care about the things that depend on you. The money will follow. The success will come. But it comes because you became someone worth being. On a winter evening, Richard Hackett, now in his 80s, sat with Thomas in front of a warm fire. Do you know why I hired you that day on the mountain? Hackett asked. Because Emily needed saving, Thomas said. No, Hackett said. I hired you because I had been watching the auction for years. I had heard the story of the man who spent his last $20 on a worthless foal. I had been trying to find that man for years, wanting to know who he was, wanting to understand what made a man do something so foolish and so beautiful at the same time. Thomas looked at him surprised. When I found out you were the one who saved Emily, I understood, Hackett continued. I understood that you were the kind of man I wanted near my daughter, the kind of man I wanted running my horses, the kind of man I wanted to become more like myself. Hackett reached over and put his hand on Thomas's shoulder. You didn't become a legend because you were the best horseman, Thomas. You became a legend because you were the best man. That foal you saved, she became important because you made her important. You showed the world that even the most forgotten, the most broken, the most worthless-looking thing can become legendary if someone cares enough. That night, Thomas thought about that little foal in the auction barn. He remembered her empty eyes. He remembered her ribs showing through her skin. He remembered knowing, in that moment, that he was looking at something that the world had already given up on. And he had chosen differently. The legend was not really about courage. The legend was about choice. It was about a moment when a man had nothing, absolutely nothing, and he chose to spend what little he had on something broken and forgotten. He chose loyalty over survival. He chose to care even when caring cost him everything. And somehow, that choice had changed everything. Years later, when people told the story across the frontier, they did not talk about the money Thomas made. They did not talk about the successful ranch or the famous horses or the buyers from New York. They talked about the man who spent his last $50 on a dying foal. They talked about loyalty. They talked about what it means to see value in something that nobody else sees. They talked about the choice to care when the world tells you not to care. They talked about how one moment of kindness, one choice made in poverty and desperation, could echo across decades and change 1,000 lives. On the night before Thomas Morgan died, he walked to the oak tree where courage was buried. He placed his hand on the tree and he whispered words that only the wind could hear. Thank you, he said, for seeing me the way I saw you, for letting me become the man I needed to become, for the legend we created together. The tree did not answer, but the wind blew softly, and somewhere in that wind, there was the memory of a little foal and a broken man who chose each other on a day when everything seemed lost. And from that choice, a legend was born, not because they became rich or famous or powerful, but because they understood that loyalty changes destiny. And sometimes, the weakest moment can become the strongest memory.